Good morning and welcome to Newsviews. I'm Judy Sue. We're only just about 3 weeks away from the primary election with several key races here in Illinois, including the one for governor. Now, some say it could be the most expensive in U.S. history, the campaign we're talking about. According to ProPublica, the 5 leading candidates have already raised more than $136 million. And we're still months from the general election. But first, the goal is to make it past the primary, of course. So what approach will candidates take in these final days of the campaign to get your vote? To discuss all of that, I am talking this morning with political science professors Twyla Blackman-Larnell of Loyola University and Wayne Steger of DePaul. And good morning to the both of you. Thank you for joining us here on Newsviews. So obviously, everybody is feeling sort of like we're bombarded with these political ads right now.
Right.
As we get close to the campaign, I want us to talk about sort of the science behind the campaign right now. There is a strategy behind every message that goes out there right now, right? So let's start with that. What is happening with the campaign? Does the focus shift any now that we're just a couple of weeks out from the campaign?
Sure. I mean, if we take the long view, J.B. Pritzker with virtually unlimited resources started off building name recognition imagery about a year ago. And, you know, now he's running negative ads on his opponents, which tells me he's a little bit scared. Rauner is going after JB. If he can knock out JB, it saves him a lot of money later on. In my view, the big effect on Rauner's ads impacting the Democratic race are those tying him to Rod Blagojevich, because it's raising the visibility, the salience of, you know, kind of the history of corruption on the Democratic side, tying JB as an insider to that, which really works against him with kind of the progressive anti-establishment voters on the Democratic side. I think it's a very effective strategy.
And Twyla, what do you think?
And also at this time, we have to remember there's a ton of Democratic candidates running for the same position. And so they are also going to be using these ads to set themselves aside or make themselves different from other Democratic candidates as well. And so this is what we were talking about as it relates to agenda setting. You know, many candidates, especially on the Democratic side, are really trying to show how different they are from J.B. Pritzker or how supportive they are of very particular communities throughout the state of Illinois. And so if you look at their websites and looking at their issues, their agenda, and even their campaign ads, they're very different campaign ads depending on which Democratic gubernatorial candidate we're talking about.
Now, in terms of what the viewers, right, as we're looking at these ads, what do you think is critical for the viewers, the listeners, the community member walking by those posters to keep in mind as we're looking at all of these ads?
I think most ads are going to have really 2 effects. One is the name recognition, and then is kind of the emotional affect or the attitudinal response that these ads eviscerate or evoke. In the case of JB, he's trying to create this kind of friendly, I'm going to be a champion for you. Daniel Biss is running more of an ad that, you know, he is going to be taking on the establishment, but really promoting values that have been ignored. Kennedy's ads, which are very few. He's running the fewest ads. He has the smallest budget committed at this point, is really still trying to develop name recognition. He's very far behind.
And Twyla, you and I were chatting earlier before we came in, and the message is different in different communities, right?
Yeah, and it makes a ton of sense because different communities have different political interests, and they also have different political leniencies. And so for someone like J.B. Pritzker, which we also noticed, is we haven't seen him campaigning a ton in lower income communities, particularly throughout Chicago, but we see his signs everywhere. And so often it's not really the information that are in these ads, but it is name recognition. Most of us go to the ballots with knowing just the headlines. And so if we see a name that we recognize, subconsciously or consciously, we're more likely to check that box on the ballot, right?
I also want to ask you quickly about social media. There was so much backlash, right, against it when it comes to political campaigns. How is it being used right now that you see?
I don't think candidates are relying on social media as much as their supporters are, right? It's a lot of retweeting and sharing of information because remember, their billboards and their radio ads are not super informative. And so for people like us who are on social media, when we see, you know, a piece that's been written analyzing that very controversial political ad, right, we're sharing it, we're talking about it with our friends on social media or with people who are not friends, strangers, if we're talking more about Twitter. And so I think social media becomes more of a tool for us and not so much as a campaign tool for political leaders. I don't think that, you know, they're not spending a ton of money on social media.
I'm gonna hold it right there at our conversation, take a quick break and continue our conversation after this. I also want to ask about the difference between the strategy between an incumbent versus a challenger at this point. We'll be right